that race, I'll be on top again. I'm not gonna let you take me down. It's gonna be the whole 9 yards or nothing.
Welcome to Legal Straight Talk. I'm Brett Harrison, attorney with the Harrison Law Group. Today we have a special guest again, backed by popular demand, talking about adoption law. Fred Wohl, thanks again for taking time out of your day to come to speak with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you know, I got a lot of emails and comments from colleagues and friends and different emails asking about, can we talk a little bit more about the initial stages of, let's say as a couple, we decide, you know what, we want to adopt. What are the first key steps?
Okay. Sometimes people have an agenda. They've investigated, especially with the internet now, they've investigated what they want to do. And they come in telling me, I want to go to an agency or I want to do private adoption. If you don't have that built in, you should probably have a half-hour to a 1-hour consultation with a reputable adoption lawyer, and you can probably get recommendations. And get the feel of what's out there, from international adoption to domestic agency adoption to private or independent adoption, where you find the child.
So when you interview a new client that comes in, new parents that want to adopt, it's a fact-finding for you as well.
Absolutely. There's I do a substantial intake.
What are you looking at predominantly? What are the key issues that you try to get across?
What I want from them, you mean? The first thing I'm looking for is to make sure they're both ready to adopt. Sometimes one partner is not. And there's no good reason to adopt unless you both want to.
Got to be into it. It's a serious business.
Yeah, but I'm not a social worker. If I thought I felt that strongly, I would talk to them about it. But generally speaking, the couples both want to do this. That's why they're in my office. So I give them, if they want the short consultation, I do that. I tell them what's out there and briefly the advantages and disadvantages of each type of adoption. If they sort of know where they want to go, I go through that initial burst of explaining what's under the whole umbrella of adoption, agency, private, international. And then I break into the nuts and bolts of the kind of adoption they want to do. If it's agency or international, generally speaking, I'm just going to explain to them the basics of the role that I play, and then the agency that they're dealing with takes over. And then they will come to talk to me from time to time thereafter, but briefly on the phone perhaps. Just brief questions.
Do you get more involved when it's private?
Yes. When you're doing a private or independent adoption, the couple has an active role. When I say couple, I'm including single parents doing this, but the couple has an active role. They either are looking to make a connection on the internet or through the more traditional advertising method. And once they connect with birth parents, there's a third way, and that's called intermediary adoption, where a clergyman or clergywoman, for instance, or a coworker knows somebody who's pregnant and gets the couple to communicate with that person, and that person decides they want to place the child with the couple. That's independent or private adoption as well.
Like a matchmaker. It's almost like a matchmaker.
Yes, and as long as that person gives an affidavit to the court that they're not getting anything for making that match or that connection, the court is perfectly happy with it. In a lot of ways, interestingly, an intermediary adoption some people think is the best, because that way the birth parents know somebody who knows the couple, so that he or she can feel comfortable that somebody they know who's on their team knows the couple. And in future times, they could go to that person. Let's say it's the priest, and they could say to the priest, can you just tell me how they're doing? I don't want to know who they are. I'm perfectly happy with what I did. But how's the kid doing? And the priest can tell them that even though they may never ask that question and probably won't, the fact that at the time of making the difficult decision to place the child for adoption, they know that they could ask that question 5 years hence, gives them comfort.
And also, I would imagine the comfort comes when they realize, hey, at least somebody knows this family, and they're in the right place. It's be a nice place to place a child.
Yeah.
So now let's go into the 3 different areas that you mentioned.
Sure.
Just give a couple of sentences about private adoption, which you just did.
Yeah.
Where it seems like you need the attorney there to prepare documents and make sure you're going to have to go in front of the judges and prepare.
Well, you need that pre-certification that we talked about the last time we were together. In private adoption, you do it. You and your attorney do it. You have to be certified before you accept custody of a child.
Right.
In agency, the agency does an approval of you. It's a process.
Does that also have to get approved by a judge?
No. In private adoption, the judge acts sort of like the agency.
Oh, okay.
The judge gathers all the information about you, your petition to be approved, your fingerprints, child abuse clearance, and a home study by a certified social worker, and then the judge decides to sign an order, or not, but it's usually yes, sign an order pre-certifying you, and now you can accept a child, a private placement child. In the agency setting, you don't need the judge because the agency is licensed to do this very thing. They issue an internal approval and they say, okay, you're on the waiting list. And it's much the same paperwork as in private, but they do the deciding.
And where do these agencies find the children?
Agencies find the children in pretty much the same way that couples do in private adoption. They advertise. They say, there's an ad, there's one particular agency that now I'm seeing on television. They say, pregnant, need help, maybe adoption is the answer, and they give the name and number of the agency. So the agencies, of course, agencies also have word of mouth once they've been in business for a while.
Now, do these agencies typically work overseas or just within?
There are 3 kinds. There is the kind that's really involved in international. There is the kind that's domestic adoption only, and there's the kind that does both. There are some agencies that are, doing domestic and also doing international adoption.
Now, what is the typical cost to utilize an agency?
Oh, that's a hard one.
Or range that you've heard or
Okay.
typically see?
No.
Maybe why don't we do it that way?
Okay, some agencies have some degree of subsidy from fundraising or whatever. I would say, and again, these numbers are somewhat mixed up because you can't tell whether certain categories of expense will ever occur. For example, one agency may charge you $20,000 for the entire adoption. But embedded in that is they housed the birth mother for 6 months. They fed her for 6 months. They paid the co-pays to the doctor for 6 months. Then there's a placement fee in there, which we talked about last time, I think we met. The fee that they get for doing what they do. Now in New York, agency has to be not-for-profit. So that limits, of course, the expenses. But you can see another agency in New York that will end up charging $30,000 for the entire process.
It's not really, there's no set or regulated fee.
No.
Now, when it's a private adoption, is there typically an expense that the adoptive parents have to pay for the medical expenses, housing? I mean, how does that work? Is that negotiated by the attorneys? Or?
Again, for lawyers, 374(6) of the Social Services Law says that you can't be paid for arranging an adoption unless you're an authorized agency, in which case you can get certain expenses, not profit, but you can get certain expenses, including a placement fee. I think I may have lost the question. What did you want to know after that?
Is there any? What is the cost when you adopt from a private person?
Oh, okay.
Do the adoptive
Okay.
parents have to pay for the
Okay.
hospital, the
Okay.
medical, a place to stay, a fee for
Right.
carrying the child? I
The
guess.
same, all right, that same section of the law applies to private adoption. And that means that, the way this is interpreted under our law is, and this is a rough rule, it can be modified slightly, you're only allowed to pay for birth mother or birth parents' expenses for 3 months before the birth and a month after the birth. Again, it's subject to some adjustment because the courts don't want to see you, in effect, enticing a placement merely by paying expenses. Those expenses have to be reasonable. So we'll see over the years a case where the expenses are only $200 a month rent, plus $100 for food and $100 for sundries. I can say that almost never does a couple get burned for laying out expenses if they're proceeding properly and
What about for
conservatively.
the hospital?
The couple will usually either the birth mother is going to be picked up in a typical case. I mean, sometimes the birth mother has insurance; she might be working. But in a typical case, either Medicaid or the equivalent in the other state, or you're going to be paying the expenses of birth. And we try not to spend them until after the child is in your custody.
Now, what is the typical expense with private placement when you utilize an attorney? Is there generally?
Yeah, there is. The courts jealously guard your money. The lawyer must file, and you must file something saying what expenses you're paying. But the lawyer must also account for his time, regardless of what his fee is. The court wants time records.
Whether even if it's a flat fee, let's say you just have.
The court doesn't want a flat fee. The court wants time records. What you frequently see among reputable adoption lawyers is they have a cap. In other words, they say, we're not going to charge you more than X $1,000 unless
There's litigation.
all heck breaks loose. There's something surprising, or you're dealing with two birth mothers at the same time and they both give you babies. Well, I'll end up charging you more because I've done more work. I've done two separate proceedings. But most of us do offer a cap.
What typically is the cap on a traditional private placement type?
I would say, and it includes a lot of things we haven't discussed, but I would say that and I'll call it a soft cap because of the possibility of change, like in the $7,500 range.
Now, what other things does it include?
All right.
What does it include?
Well, does or doesn't?
Does.
Does. Whatever your consultation was, the pre-certification proceeding, which is that separate little proceeding to get you approved by the judge, and then it includes the interplay and communication and screening of birth parents once you've connected with them,
Okay.
and then the legal work necessary to have the adoption approved. Probably, unless you're lucky enough to have experienced, reputable adoption attorney on the other end, probably your own lawyer is going to prepare the adoption papers, and the other lawyer for the birth couple, and they will have a lawyer, just has to review what you've done.
Does the birth parent or parents have to have a lawyer?
Yes,
Let's say they can't afford one. Does that come out of?
you. I'm sorry, the client.
But now,
Yeah, the
if
client.
the client is paying for the other attorney, there's no conflict there.
No. Look, it happens in matrimonial law all the time, that the moneyed spouse pays the legal bill for the lawyer who's beating him up.
Yeah, but usually the other spouse isn't choosing the other attorney. Does you know what I'm saying? I mean, I guess this is less adversarial in and of itself.
If it becomes adversarial, then you have a bigger problem than whose lawyer.
Well, you're
is who.
probably not going to
Yeah.
use two lawyers from the same firm. I can't.
Oh,
imagine.
no. When I said that she has a lawyer, I meant I was thinking of an interstate adoption at that moment.
Right.
But even if the baby is being born in New Paltz, New York, she will have a lawyer. And occasionally birth parents don't know an adoption lawyer. And we can suggest to them, look, here's several lawyers that we've worked with in the past, but you can call your local surrogates court or the Bar Association and ask them to recommend people who are experienced in adoption. As you get more rural or more out of the way, you're not likely to have an adoption expert when you get further away. But the local bar associations be able to help. And again, we're allowed to give them a few names to try calling.
Now, this was an interesting question that appeared in my office, and people were asking me some questions.
Yeah.
Which was, now the child's older, the adoptive child's older, and they want to know, they want to see their birth certificate. They want to see the curiosity, which I'm sure happens at different times, which I think you clearly can speak to because you have 2 children.
Yeah.
I don't know what age you adopted them, but
They were both babies.
both babies.
Newborns, yeah.
Do they have a right in New York?
Great question. This is very current. There is a law, there is I think it's in bill form now, but the bill with which most adoption attorneys generally agree, as long as it's not retroactive, is to allow a child when he or she reaches majority to see his original birth certificate.
Majority meaning what age?
Well, it depends on 18 or 21, depending upon what gets passed.
Okay. That they're going to have a right to see their birth certificate?
See their own birth certificate. Now, that might sound self-evident, but New York is a confidentiality state. And until now...
Well, in plain English for our
I'm sorry. New
for our
York is a
viewers.
state. New York is a state in which if the birth parents and adoptive parents go into the final adoption without having clear identifying information, like last names and addresses, the adoption is sealed. And nobody can go into it except for an emergency. And even in an emergency, they can't go into it and get those names and addresses. They can only have someone, a court referee, find out the medical information or whatever the emergency is and get it to them.
So it's confidential unless
Right.
you're in agreement.
Right. Now, but presently, there is
Right.
also something called the separate issue, the adoption registry in Albany. With the adoption registry, adoptive child can register and say, and they get notice of this, by the way. The adoptive parents and the birth parents have notice of this. The adoptive child can register in Albany, I'm willing to be found. The birth parent can register and say, I'm willing to be found. And
how new is that Albany?
I'm going to guess, and I could be off on this, 10 years. But I think that's about right. And then if both are in agreement, they could connect. The difference now is without consent of anybody under this bill, a child would be able to find, in quotes, his or her identity on the birth certificate.
On the birth certificate.
Right. Now, that doesn't prove that you will be able to connect with that person. You would still have to find them.
But at least you know
something.
certain information.
There's a piece of information that a child who was hungering for that information could now have. And as I say, most of the people on the state bar panel, we surveyed them when this came up, and they wrote back to me as co-chair and said, we like this bill. Some of us are bothered by the possibility that it may be retroactive, because
Meaning what now?
retroactive meaning a birth mother who was promised anonymity when she gave up a child 18 years before may have built a new life and may simply want, to
Their
not
privacy
be
respected.
contacted.
Right.
Yeah, and there look.
And what has been the decision towards that? What have you found that? Is it going to,
I think it's going to pass.
that even the retroactive or
No, I'm concerned because of the retroactivity
That's
issue.
a good point,
And I can't speak for the legislature. Several people spoke to that point.
But now, it should be noted, though, I would assume, that every state is different, whether they're a confidentiality state or not.
Yeah.
It's state dependent, right?
Yes.
What are most of the states?
Ooh.
Is it 50-50 you're finding, or?
I don't think I've ever been asked for the count.
Well, roughly, would you say? I mean, is there a certain? I would imagine when the legislature was looking at it, they would say, well,
Are you
these
talking
other
about-
states, what's New Jersey? I mean, I would assume New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, generally are always grouped in.
No, there are differences. There are big
Differences?
differences. Connecticut, for instance, doesn't like private adoption.
I got to say, after listening to you now for the two shows and some other conversations we had, tell you what really gets under my skin a little bit with all of this
Yeah.
is that, adoption is very parallels to me a lot of family law,
Right.
and in the divorce area when it comes to children from state to state, there's certain uniform acts from state to state to state because it involves children.
Right.
I don't understand why we can't have, I know why, but it troubles me that we can't have certain uniformity with whether it should be, especially an issue of confidentiality
Right.
and certain laws that is now just state by state. There's not a lot of uniformity
Well-
in this divorce area. And in adoption, and it's kind of troubling to me.
All right. I think it should be less concerning to you because there's something that sort of, it's like needle and thread to the seams of what you're talking about. The interstate compact documents assure that nothing is being done that's inconsistent with this state's law in order to comply with this state's law. So if there is confidentiality or not confidentiality in this state, the couple has to decide, is that okay with them before they're doing that? They're going to know. We're going to
Okay.
tell them. So there's no surprise there. Once the child is in our court and the consents that the birth mother signs in the other state or birth parents sign in the other state indicate that they're submitting to the jurisdiction of New York and it's a New York case. So there's no surprises there either. Everybody knows that at the word go. I think the difference with the conflicts in the cases you're talking about, maybe child abduction or other divorce issues, those are coming up by surprise. Nobody planned that in the marriage, and therefore that uniformity is probably a more serious issue than an adoption where everybody knows what they're getting into.
When you write a contract for the birthright parents, are there certain
No contracts.
No contracts or forms?
They can't agree to anything before the birth. Yeah.
No, once they have the child.
Okay.
Now, is there certain forms that you use? Or-
Affidavits.
Affidavits. What must be in them? What do you
Okay.
find that is necessary?
Okay. For one thing, if the other birth parent, we'll call him the birth father now, if the other birth father parent is not there and participating, we need what's called a 111A affidavit after the section in the DRL. A 111A affidavit reciting why he's not needed.
Okay.
Okay? In other words, nobody lived with me during this period, nobody supported me, nobody paid for the medicals, nobody held himself out as the father, and she doesn't name anybody, then the court can proceed without him. We prepare the consents, both the out-of-court consent if she's signing in a hospital and the in-court consent if she's signing in a courtroom, which is immediately irrevocable, by the way, if she signs in a courtroom.
Okay.
Did we? I think we discussed that last time.
Yes.
That there's 45 days if it's out of court, but if it's in court, it's irrevocable.
Meaning you can't revoke it.
I'm sorry, we can't revoke it. And there's many additional documents that are signed, just routine affidavits. And of course, we have what we left out was we did screening before this all came about
Right.
when we talked to the birth mother. One thing we found is, it's remarkable in some ways, is birth mothers are extremely honest in these affidavits. And at first blush, you'd say, well, why wouldn't they fudge things? You know, why wouldn't
That's
they hide
nice.
things? Like for instance, they smoked during the pregnancy. Why would they hide that? And the answer apparently is, and I'm just basing this on the empirical data, is that they are so vested in the process and they've picked this couple and they want this to all be happy that they say, I don't want them to be surprised at the time of birth by something that shows I did something
That makes
wrong.
me feel good that there is that honesty.
But
Believe it or not, Fred, we've again come to
No.
the half an hour, and I'd like to thank you for coming again and sharing your knowledge. But I think what can be taken out of this is that this serious matter, if you're going to adopt a child, and I think you should go to an attorney to understand all your different options and what the requirements are. And you see from the last couple of from this show, the adoption attorney is doing a lot of work, and is looking out for your best interest and your future family's best interest. So I think it's important that you go to somebody that's experienced, not my personal opinion, not just a general attorney that does just general contracts and stuff like that. I think you need a specialist in this case, which I think there are a few, such as Fred and other people which you can find. Once again, thank you. Thank you, Channel 20, and thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
Cablevision. Take care now.